Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings MLB video for Friday, April 29th. We got a nice 14-game slate to talk about here, so I'm going to get right into it today. The idea of our Benny's Bat section here, we try to look at each pitcher that's on the mound, figure out what their weakness is, and then figure out which batters on the other team profile to do the best against them. So we're going to start at the top with the White Sox going up against the Baltimore Orioles. Carlos Rodon pitching for the White Sox. Left-handed pitcher, right-handed bats hit .272 against him with a .159 whip last year and 11 home runs in 98 innings. So not too bad, about one every 9 innings. There's a lot of right-handed bats in this Baltimore team, and this offense has been pounding out a lot of runs. Guys like Joey Rickard up at the top, good versus left-handed pitching, although only limited at-bats in the major league, so there's not too much that we can go on. But so far, he has hit them well. You can look at a guy like Trumbo, who does have a long track record of hitting left-handed pitching, 380 WOBA, 283 ISO since the beginning of 2015. Other guys that are also in consideration, Manny Machado coming off the Grand Slam yesterday. A guy like Adam Jones, who usually hits left-handed pitching pretty well, had a decent game yesterday as well. And even a guy like Chris Davis, who's not bad in lefty-on-lefty matchups. I feel like whenever they go up against a left-hander, his ownership rate is really low. Had a home run yesterday against a left-hander. So, like I said, he's still somebody that's in play. And besides, once you chase the starting pitcher out of there, most of the relief pitchers that come in are right-handed. So he still may get an at-bat or two against a righty later on in the game. I think you can stack up this Baltimore team here. Not a huge fan of Rodon. And like I said, he does struggle against righties. Baltimore's at home, and this offense has been putting up some good numbers. So definitely like the Orioles' bats in this one. On the other side of that game, we got Mike Wright pitching for Baltimore. He's not a very good pitcher. Left-handed bats usually do better against him. So Adam Eaton at the top of the order, definitely somebody we can consider. 360 WOBA, 166 ISO. Actually, 1 of 3 lifetime already against Wright with a home run. So he not only profiles well against him, but we have seen him hit pretty well against him in the one opportunity that he's had. Another guy you can look at, righty-on-righty matchups. Jose Abreu, really good. 368 WOBA, 229 ISO. He is off to a slow start this year, but he is the biggest bat that they have in that team. When they're going to put up some runs, you're usually looking for a guy like Abreu to do it. Todd Frazier had the home run yesterday. Maybe he's starting to break out of his slump, but he has not been as good as they expected him to be since coming over. Had a much better season last year when he was in Cincinnati. Kind of struggled a little bit, as has most of the White Sox offense. This is not a very good offense. They've basically been winning a lot of games early on here by scoring enough runs to, support the great pitching that they do have. Next game we can talk about, Cincinnati going up against Pittsburgh. Juan Nicasio going to be on the mound for Pittsburgh here. Left-handed bats did a little bit better against him. They batting average over 300 against him since 2014. The only guy on Cincy that really stands out to me is going to be Joey Votto. 407 WOBA, 221 ISO against right-handed pitching. I think this is a really good spot for him. Like we said, Nicasio struggles with left-handers. It's actually kind of tough on right-handers. He's a better pitcher than the numbers would show. Remember, this was a guy that was in Coors Field for a long time. Now he's pitching in Pittsburgh. So you're basically going for one of the best hitters parks to one of the best pitchers parks. And I think that's going to have a big effect on his numbers this year. So even though those numbers are a little high looking back in his past, take it with a grain of salt because he did pitch his home games in Colorado for the last couple of years. On the other side of this game, we have relief pitcher Dan Straley. Hasn't really been a starter since about 2013. And wasn't even a starter at the beginning of this year. He came in, they had a couple injuries, so now they put him in the starting lineup as one of the starting pitchers. Probably only going to get you 5 or 6 innings in this one, and then it's going to wind up going to the bullpen. He is a right-handed pitcher, so you're looking at the guys that hit well against righties. Andrew McCutchen, 371 WOBA, 195 ISO, probably at the top of that list. John Jaso, another guy, 360 WOBA, 160 ISO, might even be leading off again as a left-handed bat. You could also look at some of the other righties that they had. David Freese batting in the 3 hole is interesting. Sterling Marte batting in the 5 spot is another guy that you could take a look at. That's probably about it. I'm not looking to get a ton of bats into my lineup that are hitting in Pittsburgh. Like I said, not a very good hitter's ballpark. Although I think the matchup is pretty decent with them. Straley's been okay, but like I said, he's not a guy that I expect to go more than 5, maybe 6 innings. He's basically a converted long reliever. Next game we can look at, we got Cleveland going up against Philadelphia. Corey Kluber's on the mound for Cleveland, and he hasn't had a great start to the season, but he is a very good pitcher, and he's going up against an offense that isn't all that spectacular. Left-handed bats have been the way to get at him. They have about a 240 batting average as opposed to like a 200 batting average or 210 for guys from the right-handed side last season. So, Maikel Franco, who's somebody who hits good in righty-on-righty matchups, 362 WOBA, 206 ISO. Again, righty-on-righty, not really the way I want to attack Kluber. He's a good pitcher. I don't think there's a lot of guys that we want to take. Andres Blanco and Odubel Herrera, two left-handed bats, pretty cheap towards the top of that Philly order. I think both of those guys could be in play. They both got WOBAs around 350. Blanco's ISO score a little bit higher than Odubel Herrera's, but Herrera's a guy that can steal some bases for you. So if you want to attack Kluber, that would be the way. But, I think Kluber's going to bounce back. I know he hasn't had a great start to the season, but I think this is a pretty soft matchup for him. And I'd be looking for him to have a pretty good game. I don't know if I'd use him, but I definitely don't want to be taking a lot of bets against him here. On the other side, for Philly, they're throwing Adam Morgan. Adam Morgan's a young pitcher, came up last year, had a couple starts for them later on in the season. He's been okay in limited innings. He is a left-handed pitcher, so we're probably looking at right-handed bats against them. The guy who I really like a lot is going to be Francisco Lindor. 391 WOBA, 192 ISO against left-handed pitching. He's hitting in the 3-hole there, so there's not too many shortstops you get in one of the power spots in the lineup. So if you can put a guy like Lindor in the 3-hole, I think he's in a good spot to get a couple hits today. Could drive in some runs, could score some runs with some of the guys that are batting behind him. So he's probably my favorite play. If I'm looking for some other guys, you can look at a guy like Mike Napoli. He's got really good numbers against left-handed pitching. He's going to be hitting in the cleanup spot most likely for this Cleveland order, so good chance to drive in some runs there. Pretty good hitter's ballpark in Philly, so I think he's in a pretty good spot. The other guy I'd look at is Carlos Santana. They've actually been leading Santana off, excuse me, trying to switch up the righties there. So they have Santana hitting first and then Lindor hitting third. Hitting in the one spot, he's going to get a bunch of opportunities up there. He is going up against the left-handed pitching, does have some power, is in a good hitter's ballpark. So I think Santana could be a sneaky option as well. It's tough to stack this team up because I think him and Napoli are both listed as first baseman. So you're losing one of the two if you do try to stack them. And like I said, I like both guys. I think they're both in pretty good spots today. So it would be tough to stack them because you'd have to think about it. I also don't think Morgan is a complete gas can. There are much better pitchers to target today. So Cleveland Indians stack, not really something I'm looking to roll out there. Yankees going up against Boston. You got Masahiro Tanaka pitching for the Yankees. And, he's been solid, giving up, last year and the years past, only about a 220 batting average to both sides of the plate. Where he gets himself in trouble is he does give up a decent amount of home runs, but they usually tend to be solo home runs. He's a guy who's not afraid to attack hitters when he has nobody on base. He will get a lot of strikeouts, and he will give up some home runs now and then. But as long as he can limit those home runs to solo shots and not give up a lot of hits, not give up a lot of walks, not get himself into bad situations there. Solo shots are easy for a pitcher to come back from. You give up one or two in a game, your offense gets you 3 runs. You're still going to wind up with a win. And that seems to kind of be Tanaka's MO. So if you're looking for some guys on that Boston team, you want some guys that have some pop. So David Ortiz, 416 WOBA, 322 ISO against right-handed pitching. Probably the top guy on my list that I would look to target against Tanaka if I was going that way. Travis Shaw's been playing really well, 360 WOBA, 198 ISO, hitting about 333 this year. Has shown a little bit of pop, another big left-handed bat that they have on that team. And then Dustin Pedroia, who seems to be breaking out. He's been on a little bit of a tear lately. 358 WOBA, 150 ISO score, hitting really well at home in Fenway. And like I said, over the course of the last week or two, this is a guy who's been consistently putting up double-digit fantasy points over on DraftKings. So definitely somebody I think you got to respect and take a look at. On the other side of this game, Boston's bringing up one of their young guys, Henry Owens, who's a left-handed pitcher. It's going to be going up against the Yankees. Right-handed bats are usually the way you want to attack them. But remember, this Yankee team is not great against left-handed pitching. A-Rod's the guy that stands out the most, 383 WOBA, 263 ISO number, but he hasn't really had a great start to the season. It seems like, his better days are definitely behind him. Starlin Castro's been pretty solid, but, he's a light-hitting second baseman. He is kind of cheap. I do think he makes a little bit of sense to use here, so I wouldn't mind rolling him out there. And then the other guy would be Mark Teixeira, but Teixeira is actually much better in lefty, when he's batting from the left side against right-handed pitching. So, like I said, I don't think this is a great spot here for the Yankees. I don't know if they're going to struggle enough for me to really want to roll Henry Owens out there, but they have shown that they struggle against left-handed pitching. So I don't think this is a good spot for Yankee bats. And I do think it's a better than average spot here for Owens. Although, if you think about it, I mean, basically every Red Sox-Yankee game for some reason turns into a 7-6 slugfest, no matter who's pitching and, no matter what bats are in the lineup. These two teams, it just basically is the way that it is. So, like I said, not using Owens, but I'm also not really looking at many Yankee bats. Next game we can talk about San Francisco at the New York Mets. I do like a lot of the Mets bats here, even though the game is in Citi Field, which is one of the worst, parks for hitters in all of baseball. Jake Peavy's going up. Last year, Peavy was a reverse splits guy, where right-handed bats hit better against him and left-handed bats he was pretty good against. Normally in his career, though, it's usually the left-handed bats that do the best against him. So I'm still going to be looking at left-handed bats, but I think right-handed bats are in play as well. I don't think Peavy is the same pitcher that he was 5-6 years ago when we were talking about him as one of the dominant guys in the league. I think at this point he's, basically a mediocre 3-4 kind of starter, and I do think that this hot Mets offense is going to be able to put up some runs against them. A lot of guys on the Mets that I like here. I really, really like Michael Conforto. I mean, he's hitting in the 3-hole, 395 WOBA, 275 ISO against right-handed pitching since his call-up. He's a big left-handed stick. They're putting him in the middle of that order, and he's still cheap on a lot of sites. Prices come up a lot on FanDuel. On DraftKings, I think he's still $3,500. Definitely going to have exposure to him in both cash and GPPs at that price today. Cespedes, if he plays, 387 WOBA, 272 ISO, righty on righty matchups. A lot of power, middle of that Mets order. Think he's going to be in the middle of anything that they do today. Curtis Granderson leading off, 382 WOBA, 226 ISO against right-handed pitching. Another guy I think profiles well against Peavy. Neil Walker, another left-handed bat to use against Peavy. He's been on fire lately. Lucas Duda's been hitting well, another left-handed bat in that order. So I do think there's a lot of guys we can look at here. I do like the stack of this Mets team. I know it's at a bad, hitter's park for them, but I do think they're going to put up some runs today. On the other side of this game, we got Steven Matz, the lefty. And honestly, San Francisco does not have great numbers against left-handed pitching. They don't have anybody who's got over a 360 WOBA since the beginning of 2015. There's a bunch of guys in the 340 to 350 range, namely guys like Buster Posey, Hunter Pence, I think, is in a decent spot here. But I think it's going to be tough for some of these lefties, like the Brandon Belts and the Denard Spans. I know Matz hasn't been great to start the season, but he is a big prospect, solid pitcher. And he has been tougher on left-handed bats over the, minor league career and his limited time in the majors. So I do think that this is a pretty good spot. Again, I don't know if I'm rolling bats out there, but I also don't know how many of these bats I want. If I am taking a couple bats here in a bad hitter's ballpark, it's probably going to be Posey and Pence. Those are the two guys that kind of stand out the most to me. Next game we talk about, Toronto at Tampa Bay. We got Drew Smyly, the lefty, pitching for Tampa Bay, and he's been really good to start the year. 287 ERA, a whip of only .73, 33 strikeouts in 28 innings. This Toronto team mashed right-handed pitching last year, has struggled against right-handed pitching this year, but you do have, a high strikeout rate. There's a lot of guys in this team that do strike out a lot. So, yeah, they are capable of putting up 10 runs, but they're also capable of striking out 10 times and making this a big game for Smyly. Basically, that, that volatility keeps him as a guy that I'm probably only going to be using in tournaments here. But, you do like that strikeout upside. It gives guys a nice floor. Also, make sure that they have a higher upside. And Smyly definitely has it today. If I'm looking at any bats against them, it's probably going to be Josh Donaldson, 452 WOBA, 360 ISO against left-handed pitching. Those are just absolutely insane numbers. The game is in Tampa Bay. I'd like it a little more if it was in Toronto for some of these bats. Tampa Bay, not really an easy place to smash balls out of. But again, Donaldson has the kind of power where he can do that. Another guy who has big power on this team and hits left-handed pitching well is Edwin Encarnacion. 364 WOBA, 222 ISO. Hit an absolute bomb the other day off a left-handed pitcher to dead center field. Definitely think he's somebody else that I would look at if I'm going to look at anybody. Right now, Joey Batista and Troy Tulowitzki are basically ice cold. I watched those at-bats the other day. Batista does not look good at the plate. I don't know exactly what the problem is. And it's not a situation where he's smoking the ball and just hitting it right to people and getting outs. I mean, he's striking out. He's hitting weak ground balls. I mean, he does not look like the Jose Batista that, is the guy that we want to pay all the way up like $5,000 for on DraftKings. So I don't think he's going to be anywhere near any of my lineups. And the same goes for Tulowitzki. At this point, those guys are basically just trading on their name. because their production so far this season has been subpar. Now, on the other side of this game, I really do actually like Aaron Sanchez. He had one or two bad starts, but he had a couple really good starts. Left-handed bats are the way you kind of want to go after him, and there aren't a ton of them on Tampa Bay. The only guy that really kind of stands out to me as somebody I'm interested in is Corey Dickerson. 399 WOBA, 305 ISO score. You know, we said those numbers might be a little bit inflated because he did play his home games in Coors Field up to this season. He has been flashing the power, so that's something good to see. That's kind of why I like him. But he really hasn't been flashing the average. He's not a guy who's hitting for the same average that he hit for in Colorado or as consistently. So, again, that kind of screams GPP play only to me. Next game, we can look at the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim against the Texas Rangers. Hector Santiago, the lefty on the mound for the Angels, and he's been really solid to start the year. You know, you'll talk to some sabermetrics guys, and they'll tell you that the underlying numbers mean that this guy is due for regression at some point. But you know what? They've been saying that for a while, and he really hasn't regressed. Had a pretty good season last year, is off to a really hot start this year. You know, the one thing I will say is right-handed bats do tend to do better against him. But if you're looking at that Texas team, I mean, there's a lot of lefties. Nomar Mazara, Fielder, Moreland, you know, they're throwing a lot of lefties up there at the top of the lineup. The only guy that I really have any exposure to on this Texas team right now, I do have a couple shares of Adrian Beltre. 392 WOBA, 223 ISO since the beginning of 2015 against lefties. You know, he's definitely somebody that I think is going to be in play today. There are some other options at third base, so I don't have him as my number one. But I do think that he's a nice one-off or two-off if you're looking to get away from some of the chalk in the tournament. I don't think he's going to be very highly owned. On the other side of this game, we got Kobe Lewis, the right-hander. You know, left-handed bats usually do better against him, but there are no big left-handed bats on the Angels. So let's take a look at his right-handed bat numbers. Righties hit 260 against him last year, 1.24 whip, which is very respectable, but he did give up 13 home runs in 92 innings to right-handed bats. You know, the guy who stands out the most to me is obviously Mike Trout, 406 WOBA, 293 ISO, righty-on-righty matchups. You know, he's just a monster. I mean, he's one of the best players in baseball, in play almost every day, although I got to be honest, the production hasn't really been there. Teams have been able to kind of pitch around them because there's not much else in this lineup to really be worried about. I guess if you want to look at a guy like Pujols does have a ton of power. You know, righty-on-righty is usually, where he excels, so I think it could be a decent matchup for him. But there are so many other better first base options. He's not really somebody I have towards the top of my list today. Next game we can talk about, we got Detroit going up against Minnesota. Detroit is throwing the rookie Fulmer, who's coming up to make his first start. It's a right-handed rookie, pretty high strikeout range and a pretty high strikeout percentage in the minor league. So he is somebody that can get the Ks, and I think that's good because he's going up against a pretty bad Twins offense here. You know, again, we haven't had a lot of luck using these guys first time starting up in the majors, but I think Fulmer can give us 6 innings today, probably get us 6 strikeouts and limit it to 2 runs or less against, you know, let's face it, a team that's got one of the lowest batting averages, lowest runs scored, and highest strikeout percentages against right-handed pitching. You know, that's the kind of guy that you want to that's the kind of team that you want to target guys against. So I do think Fulmer makes a little bit of sense here. Depending on the price, you know, if he's like minimum price or really, really cheap, I think he could be that really cheap guy you use in a tournament in order to fit in some of the bigger bats or, you know, get a stud pitcher like Strasburg in there, who we'll talk about in a minute. The only bat that really scares me at all on that Minnesota team is Miguel Sano, and he hasn't been off to a great start this year, but he does have a 380 WOBA since being called up last season with a 236 ISO number. So those are definitely solid numbers that, you know, would make him a guy that you got to consider. On the other side of this game, we got Phil Hughes, who actually hasn't been horrible this year. Hughes is basically equally bad to lefties and righties, and he also gives up a lot of home runs. He's an extreme fly ball pitcher. You know, he's been a little bit better to start this season, but I think sooner or later it's going to rear its ugly head. And this is a team that is kind of built to knock around a pitcher like that. They got a lot of guys with power that can put the ball in the air, and if they put the ball in the air, it could carry and wind up with a home run for him. 2 guys on Detroit that I'm looking at. Miguel Cabrera, 403 WOBA, 196 ISO, 17 of 38 lifetime against Phil Hughes for over a 400 batting average. And he has 5 home runs in those 38 at-bats. So 5 of those 17 hits have gone yard. Like I said, extreme fly ball pitcher. You get guys with power in there. They put the ball in the air. You know, sometimes it tends to carry. So he's got over a 400 batting average lifetime with 5 home runs, you know, about 1 every 7.5 at-bats against Hughes. Yeah, definitely think Miguel Cabrera is somebody that we got to look at today in a pretty solid matchup. J.D. Martinez, another guy, good righty-on-righty situations, 365 WOBA, 236 ISO, He's 2 for 9 lifetime against Hughes, so not great, but he did hit him for a home run last season. So I do think that's something that we can consider and look at. So like I said, if I'm looking at any bats on Detroit, I want these right-handed guys with some power, which basically means guys like Miguel Cabrera and JD Martinez. Next game we can talk about Miami against Milwaukee. We got Adam Conley pitching for Miami, and I think this is actually a tougher spot than people are giving him credit for. You know, I know people like to stack up against Milwaukee, and against right-handed pitching, I completely agree with you. I'm on board with it. They do not hit righties all that well, but they're not horrible against left-handers. You know, you got a guy like Domingo Santana on top of that order. Obviously, it's been limited. He hasn't had a ton of at-bats in the majors against left-handed pitching, but he is a 425 WOBA, 267 ISO in those limited at-bats. So obviously the guy hits the ball well against left-handed pitching. You also have Ryan Braun. Anytime you're talking about a lefty, 409 WOBA for him, 245 ISO. I feel like he's going to slip under the radar today, but he is at home in Milwaukee. Milwaukee's a great hitter's park. It's a place where a lot of home runs fly out of. You know, I think you can look at a guy like Braun. I do think he's in a pretty good spot. I think if you really want to get crazy, you can also go down to a guy like Chris Carter, who definitely has a ton of power. His strikeout numbers are actually down this year. You know, one of the problems with Carter is he always struck out a ton. He was basically a guy that was swinging for the fences every time he got up there. His strikeouts are down now that he's up in Milwaukee, and the home run power is still there. So I think he could be another sneaky, cheaper option. Definitely somebody I would include in the stack if I was using a Milwaukee stack today against Conley, which I don't think is a horrible idea with the game being in Milwaukee and then facing a left-handed pitcher with a righty-heavy lineup. On the other side, they're throwing a guy named Zach Davies, and this guy was supposed to be a pretty good prospect. People were talking that he was going to have a good season here, and he hasn't been good so far. He's not off to a hot start. I think I'd be okay kind of taking some bats against them. I had D. Gordon's name down here, but after that suspension, you know, for those who didn't hear, D. Gordon is now suspended for the next 80 games for PEDs. So definitely get him out of your lineups if he was in your early lineup like he was in mine. Stanton is the guy with the biggest power, 369 WOBA, 277 ISO. You know, he's always in play against any weak right-handed pitcher, which Davies kind of is. I think you can look at a guy like Yelich as a left-handed bat, 363 WOBA, 137 ISO. You know, I think he's going to be in a good spot. He's hitting third in that order, right in front of Stanton, seeing a lot of fastballs, getting a lot of, you know, he's basically more of a cash game play. Doesn't have huge upside, but he has been hitting a lot of singles, getting on base, you know, driving in a run or two here or there, scoring a run or two with some of the bigger bats behind him. You know, I think he's a viable option, especially where he's cheap. I think you could also look at guys like Justin Bour, the first baseman, who has some power. I think he could have a decent game here against Davies, left-handed bat. And then now that D. Gordon's gone, I'm assuming, and I don't know this because obviously it just happened last night, but I'm assuming we're going to start seeing some regular at-bats over the next couple months for a guy like Derek Dietrich. Now, Dietrich's a left-handed bat who does have some power. Really, really good numbers against right-handed pitching. So I think Dietrich is definitely a viable option that we got to start considering. You know, whether or not you decide to use him today, definitely have this guy on your radar. If his price is still down there in the, you know, like 24, 2,700, something like that, you know, he's the kind of guy that I like to use as a salary saver. A lot of times people will throw a guy in there like a light hitting second baseman or a light hitting shortstop, you know, as a cheap salary saving option. But those guys don't have any upside. You know, Dietrich can jack a ball out of the ballpark. He can get 2 hits. He can get you a double and you know, an RBI or 2. So like I said, he's one of the kind of cheap options that you want in there because he has some upside. So if you're going to try to round out a tournament roster and you want to put like Strasburg and, you know, try to fit in like a Bryce Harper and a Nolan Arenado or something like that, you're going to need to find some money to save somewhere. And when you are saving, you want guys that have upside, whether it's stolen base upside or home run upside. And Dietrich is definitely one of those guys that has home run upside as a left-handed batter facing right-handed pitching when he's in that situation. So with D. Gordon out for a couple months, if Dietrich's going to be the guy who's going to be seeing all those at-bats, you know, he's definitely somebody that we got to start talking about going forward. Washington's going up against St. Louis. I'll make this kind of easy. Strasburg looks really good at the beginning of the year. I know the St. Louis offense can hit. You got a couple left-handed bats that you would want to attack Strasburg with, I guess. I'm not looking to take any of the bats on St. Louis. Maybe they do get to Strasburg, but, you know, Strauss has looked really, really good. I think he's somebody that I want to be using on the mound today, even in a tough matchup. You know, remember, St. Louis, not a great hitter's ballpark. So, you know, I think Strasburg is somebody that I'm using, and I'm not really looking at any of the St. Louis bats. The other side of this game, we got Mike Leake pitching. Left-handed bats hit 263 against him last year with a whip of 1.26. So whenever you have a righty on the mound, Bryce Harper stands out to me. eye-popping numbers, 477 WOBA, 369 ISO since 2015. There's a reason this guy was the MVP last year. There's a reason why he's got 9 home runs and like 65 at-bats already this season and is an early favorite to be MVP again. He is, if not the best, easily one of the top 3 players in all of baseball, especially with the bat in his hand. This guy's an absolute stud. Lately he's been getting walked, and he's still been putting up fantasy points because they're walking him. He's stealing bases. He's scoring runs. His on-base percentage is ridiculous. So even if he gets the Barry Bonds treatment, which we're starting to see teams do, I think he has 7 or 8 walks in his last 6 games, something crazy like that. He can still do damage on the base paths, still get you some fantasy points. Love Bryce Harper. Think he's in play almost every day. Other left-handed bat I like to attack leak is going to be Daniel Murphy. 355 WOBA, 199 ISO. His hitting 5th. Like I said, as long as teams keep walking guys like Bryce Harper, he's going to get up with a lot of guys on base this entire season. So he's going to have a chance to drive in a lot of runs, which is something that you don't really get from a lot of second basemen. So I do like Murphy where he's second base and third base eligible. I don't like him as much where he's third base eligible because there are some bigger bats you want to use there. But where he's second base eligible, again, like Dietrich, he's a guy that has upside that not a lot of other, light hitting second basemen do. And he hits in a nice power spot in the order in the 5 hole. So Murphy, another guy that I think is in play. Next game, Colorado at Arizona. I know it's not Coors Field, but Chase Field in Arizona gives up a lot of runs too. So I think this is a good spot to look at some of the bats. You got Tyler Chatwood pitching for Colorado. Left-handed bats have done better against him, but right-handed bats have been solid against him too. So you can look at guys from both sides of the plate. The 2 guys that stand out the most to me are going to be, Paul Goldschmidt, 408 WOBA, 251 ISO, righty on righty situations. It's not his preferred split, but again, 408 WOBA, 251 ISO. That's better than most guys do, even in their preferred split. So I still think Goldie is somebody that's in play against a weak pitcher. I also really like David Peralta, 391 WOBA, 224 ISO score. Another guy that I think you can look at. Big left-handed bat right in the middle of that order for Arizona. Hits behind Goldie, same situation as we talked about before. Going to have a lot of people on base. Goldie has a high on base percentage. Teams are afraid to pitch to him. They've been walking him. So if guys like Segura, then, whoever they have in the 2 hole, whether it's, Drury or left-handed bat, whoever they decide to put up there, those guys have been getting on base. So Peralta's been getting up with a lot of chances to, basically just smash a single or a double down the line and, score a run or 2. And he's been doing his job pretty well. So I like Peralta. I like the fact that he's still cheap on a lot of sites. The sites haven't really caught up to how good this guy is and how good a spot in the lineup he has. On the other side of that game, we got the left-hander Robbie Ray pitching. Right-handed bats are the way you want to go after Robbie Ray. So on this Colorado team, that means, a guy like Nolan Arenado, who's, on a power surge and just basically looks great to start the season. 342 WOBA, 233 ISO is all he has against left-handed pitching. Doesn't seem all that great, but I'm telling you, this is a bat that I'd be scared of. He's the guy that I would, be most fearful of if I had Robbie Ray and I'm watching this game and, hoping that he doesn't take Ray Yard. Story, the shortstop, again, I know this guy strikes out a lot. I know he's very up and down, but he's still a very good player. I mean, he's on fire to start the year, 7 or 8 home runs, something like that. I know he's also got like 15 or 20 strikeouts and is on pace to break the record for the most strikeouts. But, we don't lose points for strikeouts. And as long as he's striking out, it also probably means he's swinging for the fences. So if he gets a hold of one, he is expensive. Price is down a little bit now that he's not in Coors, but he's still one of the more pricey guys. I think it gets you low ownership on him. So against the lefty, I think this is where you really want to look his way. Houston is playing Oakland today. Oakland's bringing up a kid, Manea, I think is the way that they say his name. I'm not really sure. He's a big-time prospect. This kid's going to be a stud. But he's a left-handed pitcher going up against this Houston team. It's a tough matchup for a left-handed pitcher in their first start in the majors. You got a guy like Jose Altuve on top of the order, had a 400 batting average against lefties in 2014, had a WOBA over 400 last year against lefties, has hit left-handed pitching. Not only hit him well, he's owned left-handed pitching throughout his career. So that's a tough guy at the top of the order to start with. You got guys like Springer and Correa behind him, both very good hitters, especially, against left-handed pitching. Both of these guys can mash. Even a guy like Tyler White, who might flip-flop and be in the 4-hole today ahead of Colby Rasmus. Again, another big right-handed bat, really solid. So if you have those 4 guys up at the top of the order, it's not going to be an easy start here for Manea. So I do like this kid. He is somebody to put in your Rolodex for further on down the year when he goes up against a team that doesn't hit left-handed pitching well. But for his first start here, even though he's at home in Oakland, he gets a team that does mash left-handed pitching. So I'm a little concerned about it. He could still wind up with 7 or 8 strikeouts over 6 or 7 innings, but I think he also gets tagged for at least 1 or 2 home runs. And, I think there's at least one inning where Houston puts together a big rally against them. On the other side of that game, we got Mikey Fires pitching. And I don't know, man, this guy just does not look right. Left-handed bats are really how you want to attack him. He's kind of tough on righties. Guys like Josh Reddick, 360 WOBA, 199 ISO are in play. Cheap option at catcher. I like Stephen Vogt hitting in the 5-hole there. 349 WOBA, 206 ISO. Jed Lowry, a cheap second base, third base, shortstop. He's got multi-position eligibility depending on what site you're playing. He's been their cleanup hitter since Danny Valencia got hurt. So, again, you don't find many second basemen that are going to be hitting in a cleanup spot. I don't think it's a particularly tough matchup for him. So, Lowry's another guy I think I'd want to have a little bit of exposure to. Next game we can talk about, we got KC going up against Seattle. King Felix is on the mound for Seattle, and he's been good to start the year. 180 ERA, 116 whip, 24 strikeouts, 25 innings pitched. I think he's like 1-2 or 1-3, but that has more to do with the lack of run support, which is also a reason why if you're looking to use him tonight, I don't know if it's the greatest spot because I don't think they're going to get a ton of runs, even though I do think that they could hit Medlin a little bit here. The defense that Medlin has behind him is pretty sick. So, like I said, not really looking for a ton of runs to be scored in this one. You can look at guys like Garrett Hosmer, 384 WOBA, 189 ISO against right-handed pitching, 4 of 12 lifetime already against King Felix. So he has actually hit him pretty well. You can also look at a guy like Mike Moustakas. He's been real hot. I think he has like 7 or 8 home runs already to start the year. 360 WOBA, 200 ISO, 3 of 9 lifetime against Felix Hernandez. Those would be the 2 main bats that I'd want to look at against them. Maybe a guy like Kendrys Morales, somebody else that you can put there and play. But if you have to choose between Morales and Hosmer, I think I'd take Hosmer every time. So for me, Hosmer and Moose would be the 2 guys that I'd be looking at on Kansas City. Switching over, like I said, Chris Medlin, he's been okay. He did have one really bad start, but he's been okay for this Royals team. Good pitcher's ballpark up there in Seattle. I think if I'm looking at any bats against them, the lefties in Cano, 368 WOBA, 204 ISO, maybe an Adam Lynn, 358 WOBA, 192 ISO. Those would be 2 guys that kind of stand out. I also really like Nelson Cruz. I don't love him today, but I don't mind him in a righty-on-righty matchup. Still got the 366 WOBA, 231 ISO, even in righty-on-righty situations. So I think Cruz is another guy who could be in play here. Like I said, not a big fan of Medlin. I think they do get to him. I don't expect them to be one of the highest scoring offenses on the day, though. So I don't think that I'm willing to stack them up and take a whole bunch of bats against them. A guy that I will stack up bats against, San Diego going up against the LA Dodgers. I think Alex Wood is incredibly overrated. Right-handed bats hit 297 against them with a 151 whip last year and 8 home runs in 92 innings. Now, the thing I want people to realize, I know San Diego's not good, and you look at the numbers and you say, oh, how can you say San Diego's going to knock this guy around? Well, I don't think Alex Wood is good, and San Diego actually hits left-handed pitching really well. Their struggles come against right-handers. They faced Liriano and Locke at home in San Diego last week, and everybody was saying how great a start both of those guys were against a somewhat crappy San Diego lineup. But this San Diego lineup can hit left-handed pitching. You got guys like Matt Kemp, 367 WOBA, 242 against lefties. He's already 4 of 6 in his lifetime against Alex Wood with a home run. So, yeah, definitely going to have a lot of shares of Matt Kemp today. I think he's in a great spot. Will Myers, 378 WOBA, 149 ISO against left-handed pitching. Another guy that smashes left-handed pitching well. Derek Norris, the catcher, always been known as a guy who hits left-handed pitching well, even when he was the guy in the platoon in Oakland that was hitting, against right-handers from the left side while Jaso was hitting, as well. I mean, Norris is the right-handed bat against lefties. Jaso was a left-handed bat against righties in that platoon split. It's been his split his entire career. He's got about a 350 WOBA with a 180 ISO score against left-handed pitching. So, yeah, even the Derek Norris is somebody who I think is in play. Like I said, you look up and down this San Diego lineup, there's a lot of right-handed bats. So a left-handed pitcher like Alex Wood, not going to have an easy time here. I know that Dodger Stadium is a pretty good pitcher's park, but like I said, I'm not a big fan of Alex Wood, and I am a fan of the San Diego lineup against lefties. If they can do it to a guy like Liriano, they can definitely do it to a guy like Wood. So I think San Diego's in a little bit of a sneaky spot here. On the other side, San Diego's throwing up a young kid in Cesar Vargas, 24-year-old rookie, I think he's from Mexico, but I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to check on that. This is only his second start in the major league, so we don't have a ton of a track record on him. Left-handed bats is probably the way you're going to want to go after him. So, Seager, even though he's struggling, 365 WOBA, 185 ISO in the majors against right-handed pitching. Pretty good numbers for a shortstop, especially if he's still batting in the 2-hole. Definitely somebody to consider. Adrian Gonzalez, 362 WOBA, 222 ISO. He's been a solid contact hitter for a long time. So I think Gonzalez is another guy you can look at. Maybe Chase Utley if he's leading off. A guy like Jacques Peterson towards the bottom of the lineup if he's getting some extra at-bats. Puig, righty-on-righty situations is pretty good. Same thing with Justin Turner last year, righty-on-righty situations. So I think there are a few bats that you can look at here. Remember, the game is in Dodger Stadium, so I don't know if it's going to end up 10-9 or, have a huge score to it. But I do like bats on both of these teams. I think both of these teams profile well against the pitchers that they're going to see today. And I think you should be able to get away with using bats from either side. So that wraps it up for the 14-game slate that we have here for MLB DFS. Thank you guys for joining us here at RotoCurve for the Benny's Bats section. And as always, stay classy, DFS.